And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Zombies in Space! On Ice! Zombies in Space on Ice is brought to you by Gaming 2.0 and Gamersgate, the ultimate place to download games. But seriously, 2 years after the sequel, we now have Dead Space 3, the game we would all refer to as the one with the snow in it. After watching the slow decline of survival horror in the Resident Evil series, most figured it was only a matter of time until Visceral's space survival horror suffered the same fate. Most of these concerns seemed like a reality with the release of the Dead Space 3 demo, which, to say the least, was pretty awful in terms of what we had grown to love about Dead Space. Let's start with some good news though. You don't go to Hoth until about 6 hours into the game, and the majority of the gameplay in the North Pole is surprisingly satisfying, between trying to survive the cold, a la Lost Planet's temperature system, and traversing an abandoned base, which of course has many dark, narrow hallways filled with necromorphs. Even the large, bright, open sections of the planet are fairly creepy, given how shallow your field of view is. The biggest issue in this game is its Michael Bay style, lots of explosions, and the returning character Ellie, who also somehow has her eye again, has beach ball boobies exploding out of her low-cut shirt. These are just a few things that show that EA was pushing Visceral to make a more mainstream accessible game. They seem to want to make Dead Space into the next big AAA franchise, which will slowly ruin Dead Space. This game, when compared to the previous entries, is so easy. Tons of ammo everywhere, and with the new gun crafting, it is very easy to create overpowered guns very quickly. My main gun of choice was a shotgun that ripped necromorphs to shreds and a standard machine gun attachment. And since you can hold more than one weapon, I also frequented a Tesla-powered cutter that shot incendiary grenades. These are just the beginning of the crazy weapons you can build, but at some points you start to realize what works the best. Like when fighting a crazy tentacle monster, you may think the best way to cut off its appendages would be with a plasma cutter, but nope. A shotgun that apparently shoots long range is the best weapon, in almost all scenarios. This is a minor complaint, as eventually the gunplay had to evolve, but for them to take such a drastic step was disappointing. I rarely used the classic cutter because it was just less logical when the game is shoving all these gun parts in your face. One last thing to say about the crafting. Not only do the guns you build make the game insanely easy, but if you struggle to find resources, which given the scavenger bots should never be a problem, you can actually pay real money for scraps and gun parts. This is ludicrous given the game's $60 price tag. As I said, they really aren't needed. And speaking of useless DLC, you can buy suits for $5 a piece, and get this, a personality chip that lets you hear what your scavenger bots think of you for $5. Yes, you pay money for something that destroys what little horror is left in this game. Enough complaining though, because at its core it is still a very good game. The new cooperative mode works well, but I don't recommend playing it on normal as the game is already so easy. But it is much smoother than one would think given the narrow hallways, and unlike Resident Evil 5 and 6, you don't need your partner to do specific things. Now there are a few puzzles from time to time, but most of them are pretty simple. The diversity of weapons lets you have a pretty fresh experience as you continue to play, rather than giving you 5 guns to switch throughout the game. The story is interesting, could be better, but being on an actual planet for once is probably one of the most exciting parts. It makes me wonder if the game may evolve into something more open world, where you can travel to any planet. It may not be for everyone, but it's the next logical step. The visuals on this game are fantastic. As EA pushes this game to a larger market, it would make sense for them to make the game a tad brighter. And with the added brightness, we also get to see what Visceral's art department is really capable of. There are some especially gorgeous views when you first land on the planet. Sure, Dead Space 3 isn't the horror survival game its predecessors were, but it is safe to say it is still one of the best horror games out there, especially when compared to the recent Resident Evil 6. This game wipes the floor with it. I look forward to what the series has in store for us, and hopefully with the next game, they introduce some new enemies and return to a more challenging game where every ammo clip may be your last. Overall, I give this game a 7.5 out of 10. It's worth the pickup, especially if you're a Dead Space fan, but if Dead Space 1 is your favorite and you thought Dead Space 2 had too much action, this game may be a turnoff.